In this video, we're going to look at the random sampling software assignment. So to get started on this assignment, if you're working in R, there's two different files you need to get off of Canvas. The first one is going to be the R script that contains all of the R code, and it's called random sampling R. And the other one is the data file, which is called inpatient_COVID CSV. You'll want to save both of these in a folder on your computer, and this will be the folder that you're storing all of the work in for the course. Now, one thing that I want to highly recommend is as you download different files from Canvas, please do not keep those in your downloads folder, and please don't, download the same file a whole bunch of times from Canvas. Really what you want to do is have a dedicated folder on your computer that you're putting all of the material in the course in, and then you're going to access everything from that folder. If you're unsure of how to do that, please let me know, and I'm more than happy to help you set that up on your computer. It will just make things a lot easier as you move through the course. So if you find yourself, you're downloading the same file from Canvas over and over again, please contact me and I will walk you through how to save these files all in one location on your computer. All right, so the very first thing we're going to do is let's just look at the very top of this R script, right? So anytime that you create a file in R where you're going to write all of your code and do stuff, remember it's always a good idea to start with a couple comments just to say, okay, this is what I'm going to include in this script. So notice here I've got CPH 603 software assignment. This is for module 2.2 random sampling. I'm going to write in my name. And then you'll want to put the date that you're currently working on this. So today for me is the 14th. So I will put that in. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to read in our data set. So remember, when reading in a data set, we saw one way that we could do it last time. Here I'm going to do it just by running some code. The very first thing we have to do is do what's called setting the working directory. So this tells R where in your computer the files are. And there's a couple different ways you could do this. You could just put in what is the path. So this is the path to the folder on my computer where I have everything stored. So you're going to want to change this information that is in between the two quotations here that directs to the path on your computer where you have stored the data set. Now another way that you can do this is you can use the bottom right hand window to navigate to that folder on your computer. To do that, you'll see three little dots here. You'll click, it says go to directory, and this is going to bring up the directory on your computer. So you could kind of scroll through here and you'll find the folder where you have it kept. So for example, if you're using OneDrive, you could open up your OneDrive. Maybe you've got a CPH 603 folder there. You click, and then once you get to that folder that has the data set in it, and you would want to keep on going until you get to the lowest folder where everything is stored, you click OK. It's going to open up that folder here. And then what you can do is under More, you can say Set as Working Directory, and R will automatically generate that line of code for you. And we saw that the last time when we kind of started doing stuff in R. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to read in the data set. To read in the data set, we're going to use the read.csv function. So anytime that you're using a function in R and you're not sure what that function does, what you can do is you can put a question mark, the name of the function, and run that code. So to run this, you could do this one of two ways. You could highlight it here in your script and click on Run, and notice it will pop up here and you can read about that function. Or you could just come down to the console and you could type it in directly. But either way, R will bring up some information about that function that you can read and how to use that function. So here in this line of code, I'm actually going to implement the function. So anytime I'm implementing the function, there's really three different pieces that I could potentially look at. So let's talk about these three pieces. I want to start with the middle piece first, this arrow. Now this arrow works the same as an equal sign, and you could actually change this to an equal sign and R will do the same thing. It makes no difference which one you use. So on the right hand side of the arrow, we're going to use the function. And so this function is going to tell R to read the CSV file inpatient COVID, and it's telling it that it has a header. The left hand side This is going to be the name of the data set once it's read into R. So this left-hand portion, bed underscore data, you could make that anything you wanted. COVID underscore data, or you can just call it data. Whatever you want, but typically you want a name that's somewhat informative that represents the data set that you're going to read in. So if we run this line of code, I'm going to highlight it, I'm going to click run. All right, so notice I got an error down here. So why did I get an error? Well, the reason is, remember that when I was showing you how to set the working directory, I changed my working directory to something other than where the file is located. So if you get an error that looks like this one, notice it says no such file or directory, that tells you that you've probably set your working directory to the wrong place and your file isn't in that folder. So I'm going to set my working directory to the correct folder, run my line of code again, and notice I didn't get an error this time. Take that out, that was just where I typed that before. So notice up here on the right, I have my bed data. So I can check on this data a couple different ways. One, I can click the blue arrow, and it will tell me there are two variables. There are state and beds. If I want to view this data set, I could double click on it and it will open up here. Or I could come over here and use the view function. Now notice that in the view function, the V is capitalized. Don't forget that R is case sensitive. And we get the same thing. So looking through here, notice we have the different states, and then we have the number of beds that are occupied by COVID patients. Going back to my R script, notice this time that I called the function, I didn't assign it to be an object. The reason for this is you can think of the view as being an action. I'm just saying, hey, I want to view this data set. I'm not trying to assign that to be something else. Whereas here, I wanted to read in the data set and I wanted to name it bed underscore data. Now we could explore what we call the population data. So the full data set that I read in, I've got observations from every single state. In other words, I've got an observation from all of the states. Therefore, I'm going to consider that for this exercise to be population level data. So notice this is a very small population. I only have 51 subjects or objects in my population because we have all 50 states plus DC. Typically, populations are much, much larger than this, but we're going to use this small population for illustration. So let's kind of explore this population a little bit. Now, this data was taken from January 9th, 2021. So we're going to find the mean number of beds. So notice on average, the states had about 2,500 beds occupied by COVID patients. And we see that the median was only 1,300. Now in later modules, we're going to talk about a comparison to the mean and the median and what that means about the data set. But for right now, we're not going to worry too much about that. And then the other thing we could do is create a histogram of the occupied beds. Now I already see a mistake here. I'm going to correct, and this will be corrected in the script that you have. Notice here I have the date wrong, so I'm just going to fix that. So let me run this, and then we'll talk about what this code is actually doing. All right, so here is our histogram. So a couple things looking at our histogram. First, notice that we have a title. So this line of code right here, main equals, that is what is setting the title. And we can add in a comment here to remind us, okay, that's what's giving us the title. XLab number of beds, notice that's down here. So this line of code is helping us label the x-axis. And then finally, breaks. What this is doing is this is telling the histogram where to actually break the bars. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on histograms because we're going to talk a lot about them more later in the course, but really what I want you to see here is if we look at our population data, notice the overall shape of our histogram. We have majority of our observations are falling between 0 and 5,000 beds, and we do have just 1 or 2 that are out here between 20,000 and 25,000. But majority of our data is here. And so notice since we have a spike here and it kind of draws out to the right, this is what we would call a right skewed distribution. So in this case, our population is right skewed. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take some random samples from our population. We're going to create some histograms, and we're going to see if the sample data has similar characteristics to the population data when we take random samples. Now, we don't expect it to be exactly the same. We just want to see if things look similar. So let's see how to do that. So this code right here, notice I'm kind of starting a new thing with my code. In other words, I'm going to now take my first random sample. So that's why I've made this bigger, like kind of chunked comment. So that way when I look at this code later on, my eye knows, okay, I'm starting something new here. I'm going to explore my first random sample. So that's why I've made my comment that way. Well, in order to do this, the very first thing that I need to do is I need to take my first random sample. And so to take my first random sample, my sample is going to be of size 25. So I've got a comment here telling me what I'm going to do. So again, I'm going to use a function, and the function I use this time is going to be called the sample function. So what the sample function is going to do is it's going to take my original beds, or my data set that has my number of beds in it, and it's going to select a sample of size 25. Now I want to, after I select this sample, I want to store it as an object, and so I'm going to name that object random sample 1. So we're going to run this line of code. Notice here I've got a new object called random sample 1, and so if I just highlight the name random sample or highlight the name of that object and I run it, notice I get to see my first random sample of 25 down here in the console. Now let's find the mean and the median of my random sample. And we're going to kind of compare them to my population. So my population mean was about 2,500. My sample mean is about 2,000. So there is a little bit of a difference there. But we notice that the medians are much closer between the two, about 1,300 and 1,400. Now let's look at a histogram. So again, I'm going to take a histogram of the random sample. Now notice here in the title I did change. Up above I had n equal to 51 because I had a population of 51 states. Here I'm taking a random sample of 25, so I've changed the n to be equal to 25. Everything else I'm keeping the same, except for I'm calling random sample 1 here. So let's make that histogram. All right, so here is my histogram with my first random sample. So looking at my histogram here, notice my overall shape is similar. I still have majority of my observations are between 0 and 5,000. Really what I have lost is those observations that were out in the tail. And this kind of makes sense if we think about it. There were very few observations out there in the right. So if I'm taking a random sample, the likelihood that I'm going to get those observations, if there's only 1 or 2 of them in my sample, is probably fairly low. But the overall shape of this histogram looks very similar to what we've seen before, so we can toggle back. Very similar. I've just lost some of those, what we would call observations that are in the tail. Now, some random samples will pick those up, and hopefully you're going to see that when you make your other random samples. So we've just done 1 random sample. You're actually going to have to do 4 for the assignment. So to take the other random samples, let me show you how to do that. To take your second one, what you'll want to do is just copy the code that we used to make the first random sample. We're going to paste it down below and just make a couple quick changes. First thing, we're not exploring the first random sample, we're going to explore the second. This time we're going to work with random sample 2. But we're still going to take a random sample from data beds of size 25. So the sample function is random. It's going to take a different random sample here. And then we want to find the mean and the median. So I'm going to change those to random sample 2 because I'm now exploring this sample. So let's run this. All right. So notice that random sample 2 now appears below. And we can compare random sample 2 with random sample 1, and we can see they really do have different values in them. And the last thing I'm going to do is create that histogram. The only thing I need to change here is make sure I call random sample 2 instead of random sample 1. So running that histogram, again, notice it's changed a little bit, but the overall shape is very similar to what we saw in the population. We're just missing some of those observations from the tail. All right, so to take your other two random samples, you'll do the exact same thing. Copy that code and just make those slight adjustments. Now, after you get those histograms, you're going to want to put those histograms into your write-up for this assignment. So let me show you the easy way to do that. Every time that you create a plot down here in the right-hand window, you can click on this Export button, and notice it will give you the option to save as an image. So we can click on Save It, and we need to give it a name. So this histogram we just looked at, that was our second random sample. So I'm going to call it Second Random Sample. And this is going to save in that working directory. So wherever you set that working directory to be, when you go down here and click Save, you can go back to that file on your computer and you will find that image, and then you can just paste that image into your Word document. Now, if you're unfamiliar how to do that in a Word document, here's the assignment. So pretend that this was my write-up. If you go to Insert, Pictures, and we're going to insert a picture from this device, you would click there, navigate to the folder, and then you can just paste those right into your document. All right, so as always, if you have any questions about this assignment, please let me know. I'm more than happy to help.